Tell yourself the truth. Yes, see it as it is, not worse than it is. Tell yourself the truth and deal with it. But the way to deal with it is say, what am I going to go for? There's got to be a compelling future. I got to come up with a vision for my life or a vision for my relationship. I've had terrible relationships, nothing's worked. Tell yourself the truth. I've made poor choices, or I told myself stories and gave myself excuses, or I've not had the courage, whatever it is. Get to the truth and then get yourself a vision for what you do want. Because you have to have something you're going to move towards. Does that make sense? Without a vision, people perish. It says in a very good book called The Good Book. And I know there are many good books, but that's a good one to take a look at. We need something to go for. We can deal with any problem today as long as there's something that we can look for in the future that we can strive for. It'll give us the emotional and psychological fuel, the juice, to keep moving forward. So you got to come up with a vision, and a way to do that, we'll call that step 4. Get a role model. You might get the vision from a role model, you might get the vision just from coming up with a new idea. But in order to figure out how to go from where you are to where you want to be, to close the gap from where you are to where you want to be, it's best to learn by other people's experience whenever you can. So get a role model, get their strategy, and go to work. Get into action. So I'll give you an example. Years ago, when I was first starting to try to figure out how to build myself financially, I grew up in a time when, just as I was starting to do well, this big recession happened. And I remember I was like 29, 30 years old, I think, and maybe 31. And I was doing okay, and then all of a sudden there were all these business challenges because we went through this severe recession back in those days. And I remember at the time everybody was downsizing and freaking out, and I thought, you know what? I don't want to just settle for this. I want to find a way to do well. Who's done well in really tough times? And so I started doing my homework. And in those days, you know, you didn't go out and use the internet the way you do today. You couldn't access all that information. We actually went to libraries and did research in traditional ways. I'm ancient enough to remember those days. And I started hearing about this man named Sir John Templeton. Very famous man. He's a man who became a multi-billionaire as an investor. He started with nothing. But what was interesting is when I started to find out about his story, because here's a guy that when he's a young man, he's called Sir John Templeton now. He was actually an American originally. And he wasn't Sir. He came from a very poor family. And he just decided that in his life, he wanted to not only do well financially, he wanted to do so well he could help other people at any level that he wanted. And today, by the way, he's passed, but before he did, he created the Templeton Fund, and he also created a fund that now delivers money, gives money each year at the Templeton Prize to people that do good spiritual works, and it's larger than the Nobel Prize, and it continues to go on. The guy started with nothing, and here's how he did it. Listen to me now. The reason I look for him as a role model is because he made all his money in the worst of times. He made all his money when people were going through. Recession or depression possible. His whole belief was, and this is different than almost anybody else you see around you, was pessimism was the secret to success. That what he wanted to do was make money when people are most pessimistic. Because when people are optimistic, they want you to pay for their house a huge sum of money. But as they start getting more and more pessimistic, well, pretty soon they think they can never, the house is the worst thing to have, they'll virtually give you the house, they'll virtually give you the business. And so he made all his money starting in World War II. When the war broke out and Hitler invaded over in Europe, he took all the money he had and borrowed a total money of $10,000, a total amount. He bought with $10,000 every stock on the New York Stock Exchange that was $1 or less that he thought might be useful, including some companies that looked like they're going to be bankrupt. But he did it when people were the most pessimistic. going to take over. It didn't look like we were all going to be the winners. It looked like Hitler was going to dominate. And when people were that scared, they would give up anything they had just to get a little bit back. And so he bought all the stock that eventually made him a multi-billionaire. He became a billionaire because after things changed, after the war, just 5 years later, and the economy started to surge, everything changed for him. Where do you think he invested next after World War II? Where was it?